Li Min felt the weight of every stare as she walked through the hallways of Riverside High. It had been 3 years since her family moved from Beijing to this small American town, but she still felt like an outsider. The whispering never seemed to stop. "There she goes," someone would say, just loud enough for her to hear. "The quiet girl who never talks." At 16, Li Min had mastered the art of becoming invisible. She kept her head down. Her backpack clutched to her chest like armor. Her straight black hair fell in a curtain around her face, hiding her expressions from curious onlookers. She had learned that drawing attention only led to more problems. Home was different. In their modest 2-bedroom apartment, Li Min could finally breathe. Her father worked long hours at the local hospital as a janitor, a stark difference from his former job as an engineer back in China. Her mother took whatever work she could find, cleaning houses and babysitting neighborhood children. They had sacrificed everything to give Li Min a chance at a better future, and that knowledge weighed on her every day. "How was school today?" her mother asked in Mandarin as Li Min dropped her backpack by the door. "The same," Li Min answered with a shrug, not wanting to worry her parents with the truth, that she had eaten lunch alone again, that a group of girls had mimicked her accent in math class, that she sometimes wished they had never left China. The only true joy in Li Min's life sat in the corner of their small living room, an old upright piano that her father had found at a garage sale. It was scratched and slightly out of tune, but to Li Min, it was perfect. "I'm going to practice," she said, already moving toward the instrument that had become her closest friend. Her mother nodded with a gentle smile. Dinner in an hour. As soon as Li Min's fingers touched the keys, the world around her disappeared. No more whispers. No more stares. No more feeling like she didn't belong. The music carried her away from Riverside to a place where differences didn't matter, and only the notes existed. Li Min had been playing piano since she was 5 years old. Back in Beijing, her grandmother had been a piano teacher at the conservatory. Those early lessons had planted a seed that continued to grow, even after they left everything behind. The piano was her connection to home, to who she used to be before she became the Chinese girl at Riverside High. She started with scales, warming up her fingers before moving into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The melancholy notes filled their small apartment, speaking all the words Li Min couldn't say out loud. Her loneliness, her hopes, her determination. "Beautiful," her father said from the doorway. Li Min hadn't heard him come in. He looked tired, still wearing his blue work uniform, but his eyes shone with pride. "Your grandmother would be very impressed." Li Min smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I wish she could hear me play." "She can," her father said, tapping his chest. "In here." The next day at school, Mrs. Rivera, the music teacher, stopped Li Min in the hallway. "I've been looking for you," she said with a warm smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. Mrs. Rivera was one of the few teachers who made an effort to pronounce Li Min's name correctly. "Is something wrong?" Li Min asked, automatically assuming trouble. "Not at all. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something exciting." Mrs. Rivera lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "The regional young artist competition is coming up next month. I think you should enter." Li Min's stomach dropped. "Me? Yes, you. I've heard you practicing after school. You're extraordinarily talented, Li Min." Li Min hadn't realized anyone had been listening during those precious moments when she snuck into the music room after hours, when the building was nearly empty, and she could play the school's grand piano without an audience. "I don't think so," Li Min said quickly. I'm not good enough." Mrs. Rivera's expression softened. "You're more than good enough. You have something special, something that can't be taught." Li Min looked down at her worn sneakers. "I don't like people watching me." "I understand," Mrs. Rivera said, not pushing. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and held it out. "But if you change your mind, here's the application. The deadline is next Friday." Li Min took the paper, planning to throw it away at the first chance, but somehow it ended up tucked between the pages of her math notebook instead. That night, she couldn't focus on her practice. The application form sat on top of the piano, the words "Young Artist Competition" printed in bold letters across the top. The grand prize was a $5,000 scholarship and a chance to perform with the State Symphony. "What's that?" her mother asked, pointing to the paper as she brought Li Min a cup of tea. "Nothing," Li Min said too quickly. "Just something from school." Her mother picked up the form, her eyes widening as she read. A competition? Li-min, this is wonderful. I'm not doing it, Li-min said firmly. I only play for myself. Her mother sat beside her on the piano bench. Your grandmother always said your music was meant to be shared. That was before. In China, things are different here. Li-min's voice caught. People here already think I'm strange. If I go on stage, then they will see how special you are, her mother finished. She took Li-min's hand in hers, turning it over to trace the lines on her palm. These hands were given a gift. Gifts are not meant to be hidden away. Li-min didn't answer, but that night as she lay in bed, she thought about her grandmother. She had been a small woman with a fierce spirit who never backed down from a challenge. Music speaks when words fail, she used to say. Maybe, just maybe, music could say all the things Li-min couldn't. The next day, during lunch period, Li-min slipped into the music room as usual. She thought she was alone until she heard a laugh from the doorway. Look who it is, said Amber Daniels, the most popular girl in junior year. She stood with two of her friends blocking the exit. What are you doing in here anyway? This isn't the math club. Li-min's cheeks burned. I was just leaving. Wait, said one of Amber's friends, spotting the piano. Don't tell me you play. That's hilarious. Amber's eyes lit up with cruel amusement. Oh my God, you do. Let's hear it then. Li-min clutched her backpack tighter. No, thank you. Come on, Amber pressed, stepping closer. What's the matter, scared? Leave her alone, came a voice from behind them. Mrs. Rivera stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Don't you girls have somewhere to be? With final snickers, Amber and her friends left. Mrs. Rivera turned to Li-min with concern. Are you all right? Li-min nodded, though she wasn't all right at all. She was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of being afraid, tired of letting people like Amber decide who she was. I want to enter the competition, she said suddenly, surprising herself. Mrs. Rivera's face broke into a wide smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next few weeks, Li-min practiced harder than ever before. She chose Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, a piece that demanded technical precision and emotional depth. She practiced before school, during lunch, and late into the evening. Her fingers ached and her back hurt from sitting at the piano for so long, but with each passing day, her confidence grew. At home, her parents noticed the change in her. She stood straighter. She spoke more. Sometimes they even caught her smiling to herself for no apparent reason. The competition is changing you, her father observed one evening. Li-min considered this. I think it's helping me remember who I really am. The day before the competition, Li-min overheard Amber talking to her friends in the hallway. Did you hear? The quiet Chinese girl is performing at the Young Artists thing tomorrow. My mom's making me go because my cousin is in it too. Amber rolled her eyes dramatically. It's going to be so boring. Can you imagine her on stage? She'll probably freak out and run away. The words stung, but not as deeply as they once would have. Li-min took a deep breath and walked past them with her head held high. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept imagining herself on stage under the bright lights, hundreds of eyes watching her. What if she froze? What if she made a mistake? What if everyone laughed? She crept out of bed and sat at the piano in the darkness, not playing, just resting her fingers on the cool keys. Can't sleep? Her father's voice came from the hallway. He joined her on the bench, still in his pajamas. I'm scared, Li-min admitted. Of course you are, her father said. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling afraid and doing the thing anyway. What if I mess up? Then you mess up, he said simply. The world won't end. But what if you don't? What if tomorrow is the beginning of something amazing? Li-min leaned against her father's shoulder, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wouldn't be alone. As dawn broke over Riverside, Li-min made a promise to herself. She would play not for the judges or the audience or even for the scholarship. She would play for the girl who had left her home and her friends. She would play for her grandmother who had taught her to love music. She would play for herself, and maybe, just maybe, they would hear her. The morning of the competition arrived with golden sunlight streaming through Li-min's bedroom window. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the notes of Chopin's Revolutionary Etude over and over, until the melody became part of her dreams. Now, sitting on the edge of her bed, she felt a strange calmness wash over her. Whatever happened today, she had already won her own private battle by finding the courage to enter. Her mother knocked softly before entering with a steaming cup of tea. "I made your favorite," she said, handing Li Min the cup. "For good luck." Li Min breathed in the familiar jasmine scent. "Thank you, Mom." Her mother sat beside her, smoothing a wrinkle from the simple black dress laid out for the performance. It wasn't fancy, they couldn't afford fancy, but it was elegant in its simplicity. "Your grandmother wore black when she performed too," she said softly. "She believed the music should be the star, not the musician." Li Min nodded, sipping her tea. Her grandmother's wisdom seemed to fill the room, giving her strength. Her father appeared in the doorway, holding something behind his back. "I have something for you," he said with a mysterious smile. From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box. Li Min set down her tea and took the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red velvet, was a delicate gold hairpin with a tiny pearl at its tip. "It was your grandmother's," her father explained. "She wore it for her first professional performance. Now it's yours." Li Min's eyes filled with tears as she lifted the pin. It was the first family heirloom she had seen since they left China. Everything else had been sold or left behind in their rush to start a new life. "How did you—" "She gave it to me before we left," her father said. "For when you were ready." Li Min clutched the pin to her chest. "I'll make her proud today." Her father's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You already have." 3 hours later, Li Min sat in the crowded auditorium of the Riverside Community Center, her hands folded tightly in her lap. All around her, other young musicians tuned their instruments or flipped through sheet music, their faces tense with concentration. The competition had drawn talent from 5 neighboring counties: pianists, violinists, cellists, and more, all vying for the scholarship and the chance to perform with the State Symphony. Mrs. Rivera found her in the crowd and squeezed her shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Li Min admitted with a nervous laugh. Mrs. Rivera chuckled. "That's normal. Just remember, the moment you start playing, it's just you and the music. Nothing else matters." Li Min nodded, though she wasn't convinced. Her stomach twisted as she spotted Amber and her friends filing into the auditorium several rows back. They hadn't noticed her yet, but it was only a matter of time. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Rivera said, "Don't worry about them. They can't touch your music." The competition began with a flautist from the neighboring town. Li Min tried to listen, but the notes blurred together as her anxiety mounted. She was scheduled to perform 12th out of 24 contestants, right in the middle of the program. One by one, the performers took the stage. Some played beautifully. Others stumbled through their pieces. The audience applauded politely for each one. Li Min watched their faces as they performed. Some closed their eyes, lost in the music. Others stared intently at their instruments as if willing them to cooperate. "Number 12, Li Min Chen, piano," announced the master of ceremonies. Li Min's heart leapt to her throat. It was her turn. Her parents squeezed her hands from either side. "Remember who you are," her mother whispered. Li Min stood on shaky legs and made her way to the stage. The walk felt endless. She could hear whispers ripple through the audience as she climbed the steps to the gleaming grand piano that dominated center stage. "That's the quiet girl from biology," someone said. "I didn't know she could play," another voice answered. From the corner of her eye, Li Min caught Amber's surprised expression, followed by a smirk and a whispered comment to her friend. Their laughter, though quiet, seemed to echo in Li Min's ears. The spotlight felt hot against her skin as she approached the piano. It was much larger than the one she practiced on at home, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights like a black mirror. Li Min adjusted the bench, sat down, and placed her hands in her lap, willing them to stop trembling. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she was back in Beijing, in her grandmother's small apartment, the familiar smell of incense in the air. "The piano is not just an instrument," her grandmother used to say. "It is a voice. Your voice. What do you want to say to the world?" Li Min opened her eyes, lifted her hands, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's revolutionary etude filled the auditorium. Bold, defiant, challenging. Her left hand maintained the driving rhythm while her right hand danced across the higher keys. The piece was demanding, requiring both technical precision and emotional depth, but Li Min had poured hundreds of hours into mastering it. As she played, something extraordinary happened. The nervousness that had plagued her all day melted away. The audience disappeared. The judges vanished. Even the memory of Amber's mockery faded into nothing. There was only the music, powerful, passionate, alive. Li Min's fingers flew across the keys with a confidence she had never felt before. Each note was a declaration, I am here. I have something to say. Listen to me. In the audience, her parents sat transfixed. Her mother gripped her father's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mrs. Rivera leaned forward in her seat, a proud smile spreading across her face. Even Amber and her friends had stopped whispering, their expressions shifting from amusement to surprise. As the piece built toward its thunderous climax, Li Min felt something break open inside her, a dam holding back years of silent struggles, of feeling invisible, of swallowing her words. The music poured out of her like a flood, raw and powerful and undeniable. Her fingers struck the final chords with a force that seemed to shake the very stage beneath her. Then silence. For a heart-stopping moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Li Min sat frozen at the piano, her hands still hovering over the keys, her chest rising and falling with her rapid breaths. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Li Min stood on trembling legs and faced the audience. The spotlight blinded her, but she could hear the cheers, feel the vibration of stamping feet. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted, "Bravo!" She bowed deeply the way her grandmother had taught her, and as she straightened, she caught a glimpse of the judges' table. All three judges were on their feet, applauding with the rest of the crowd. In a daze, Li Min made her way back to her seat. People reached out to touch her arm as she passed, offering congratulations and amazed comments. Mrs. Rivera hugged her tightly, whispering, "I knew it." I always knew it. Her parents couldn't speak at all. Her mother simply held her close, tears streaming down her face. Her father kept shaking his head in wonder, his eyes shining with pride. "That was unexpected," came a voice from behind them. Li Min turned to see Amber standing there, her usual confidence somewhat diminished. "I didn't know you could play like that." It wasn't exactly an apology, but something in Amber's expression had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "Thank you," Li Min said simply. As Amber walked away, Mrs. Rivera leaned over with a conspiratorial smile. "I think you just redefined yourself in everyone's eyes." The rest of the competition passed in a blur. Li Min barely registered the other performances, her mind still echoing with the notes she had played, her body humming with leftover adrenaline. Finally, the master of ceremonies returned to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, the judges have reached their decision." The crowd hushed as he unfolded a piece of paper. "Third place goes to Vincent Morales, violin." Polite applause as a tall boy with a violin case made his way to the stage. "Second place goes to Aisha Williams, cello." More applause as a girl in a flowing blue dress joined Vincent on stage. Li Min held her breath. She had played well, but so had many others. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe, and first place with a unanimous decision from our judges goes to Li Min Chen, piano. The auditorium exploded with applause. Li Min sat frozen, unable to process what she had just heard. Her mother nudged her gently. "Go," she whispered, "go." On shaky legs, Li Min made her way back to the stage. The master of ceremonies placed a blue ribbon around her neck and handed her an envelope, the scholarship. He said something about extraordinary talent and promising future, but the words barely registered through the roaring in her ears. As she looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, most strangers, Li Min realized something had fundamentally changed. She had entered the auditorium as a girl trying to disappear. She would leave as someone who had finally been seen. Her grandmother had been right all along. Music spoke when words failed. And today, through Chopin's revolutionary notes, Li Min had finally found her voice. The ride home from the competition felt like floating in a dream. Li Min sat in the back seat of their old car, the blue ribbon still around her neck, the scholarship envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Through the window, she watched familiar streets pass by, but somehow everything looked different, brighter, more vivid, as if she were seeing the world through new eyes. Her father hummed along to the radio, occasionally catching her gaze in the rearview mirror and breaking into a wide grin. Her mother kept turning around in the passenger seat to look at her, as if making sure Li Min was really there, that this moment was actually happening. "We should celebrate," her father announced as they pulled into their apartment complex. "This is a special day." Li Min smiled, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the envelope. Inside was the certificate for the $5,000 scholarship, money that would help with college applications next year. More importantly, it contained an invitation to perform with the State Symphony at their spring concert, an opportunity most young musicians could only dream about. "Nothing too big," she said, suddenly feeling shy about all the attention. "Maybe we could order takeout?" Her mother laughed, the sound light and free. "Of course. From Golden Dragon, your favorite." As they walked up the stairs to their apartment, their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Wu, opened her door. "I heard the good news," she called out, her accent thick but her smile wide. "My nephew was at the competition. He called to tell me about the Chinese girl who played like a professional." Word traveled fast in their tight-knit immigrant community. By the time they reached their apartment, Li Min's father had received 3 congratulatory text messages from friends. Inside, Li Min placed the ribbon and certificate carefully on the piano, like an offering to the instrument that had given her so much. She trailed her fingers over the keys, remembering how different it had felt to play the grand piano on stage, like riding a powerful horse after years of practicing on a pony. "The director of the symphony will call next week to discuss your performance with them," her mother said, reading through the paperwork. "It says you'll have 3 rehearsals with the orchestra before the concert." The thought sent butterflies swirling in Li Min's stomach. Playing alone was one thing, but performing alongside professional musicians was entirely different. What if she wasn't good enough? What if they regretted choosing her? Her father must have noticed her expression, because he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "One step at a time," he said gently. "Today we celebrate. Tomorrow we practice. The rest will take care of itself." That night they ate Chinese food around their small kitchen table. Li Min's parents opened a bottle of wine they had been saving for a special occasion, and even let her have a small glass. They talked and laughed, making plans for the future that had once seemed so uncertain. For the first time since moving to America, Li Min felt like she truly belonged somewhere, not just in her family, but in the world of music where her talent spoke louder than her accent or the shape of her eyes. After dinner, she checked her phone and found it filled with notifications. News of her win had spread throughout Riverside High. There were congratulatory messages from classmates she barely knew, a long text from Mrs. Rivera full of exclamation points, and even a brief "good job today" from Amber. The message that touched her most came from May, a quiet girl from her math class who had also immigrated from China 2 years ago. "You showed them who we really are. Thank you." Monday morning arrived with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. Li Min stood outside the main entrance of Riverside High, suddenly hesitant to go in. What would people say? How would they treat her now? Part of her wished she could go back to being invisible. "There she is," called a voice, and Li Min turned to see May hurrying toward her with a wide smile. "The piano superstar." Li Min groaned, but couldn't help smiling back. "Please don't call me that." "Too late," May said with a laugh, linking arms with her. "Everyone's talking about it. Mr. Thompson from the music department even announced it during the morning assembly on Friday." Together they walked into the school, and immediately Li Min felt the difference. People looked at her, not with confusion or mockery, but with curiosity and sometimes even admiration. A few students she didn't know nodded or smiled as she passed. A senior boy who played guitar in the school band stopped her to ask about her performance piece. "Told you," May whispered as they navigated the crowded hallway. "You're famous now." Li Min shook her head, embarrassed by the attention but secretly pleased. "It's just because it's new. They'll forget by next week." But they didn't forget. During lunch period, Mrs. Rivera found her in the cafeteria and asked if she would be willing to perform at the school's arts showcase in 2 months. The principal stopped her between classes to personally congratulate her. Even her math teacher, who rarely noticed anything beyond equations, mentioned her achievement at the start of class. The most surprising change came from Amber and her friends. They didn't suddenly become Li Min's best friends. Life wasn't a fairy tale after all, but the mockery stopped. When Li Min answered questions in class, there were no more snickers or eye rolls. Once, she even caught Amber watching her with an expression that looked almost like respect. "You've changed things," May told her as they sat together during study hall. "Not just for yourself, For all of us. Li Min looked up from her history textbook. What do you mean? May gestured around the library where two other Asian students sat at different tables, each surrounded by classmates working on group projects. Before we were just the Asian kids, nobody bothered to see us as individuals. Now they're looking closer. The realization settled over Li Min like a warm blanket. She hadn't set out to be a representative for anyone but herself. Yet somehow her music had opened doors not just for her, but for others who had felt invisible too. The following week brought a new challenge. Her first meeting with Maestro Rodriguez, the director of the State Symphony. He had requested to hear her play again before finalizing the program for the spring concert. Li Min practiced until her fingers ached, determined to prove that her competition performance wasn't a fluke. Her parents arranged to leave work early on Wednesday so they could drive her to the symphony hall in the neighboring city. The building was grand and intimidating, all glass and steel with massive banners advertising upcoming performances. Inside, the rehearsal room was filled with chairs and music stands, though the musicians themselves were absent. Only Maestro Rodriguez waited for her, a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes. "So you're our competition winner," he said, looking her up and down. His expression gave nothing away. Impressive performance by all accounts. Li Min stood straight, trying to hide her nervousness. "Thank you, sir. The question is whether you can do it again." He gestured to the grand piano in the corner. "Show me what you've got." With trembling hands, Li Min set up her sheet music, though she knew the piece by heart. The revolutionary etude had brought her this far, but as her fingers hovered over the keys, she made a split-second decision. Instead, she began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a completely different piece, delicate and dreamy where Chopin was fiery and demanding. She had been practicing it privately, finding in its gentle notes a peace that balanced the revolution in her heart. As she played, she forgot about the maestro, forgot about the symphony, forgot about proving herself. There was only the music, moonlight translated into sound, each note hanging in the air like silver droplets. When she finished, the silence felt almost holy. She looked up to find Maestro Rodriguez watching her with narrowed eyes. "That wasn't what you played at the competition," he said finally. "No, sir." Li Min gathered her courage. "I wanted to show range." To her surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his stern face. "Bold choice. Most young musicians stick to what won them the prize." He studied her for a moment longer. "You weren't just showing range. You were showing me who you really are." Li Min nodded, relieved that he understood. "Good." He pulled out a folder and handed her several sheets of music. "This is what we're performing in the spring concert. You'll be our featured soloist for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, second movement." Li Min stared at the music in shock. Rachmaninoff was notoriously difficult, reserved for seasoned pianists with years of professional experience. "But I've never performed with an orchestra before." "That's what rehearsals are for," Maestro Rodriguez said firmly. "You have the technical skill. More importantly, you have the heart. The rest can be taught." On the drive home, Li Min sat quietly in the back seat, the Rachmaninoff score open on her lap. The notes looked like black insects crawling across the page, complex and intimidating. This wasn't a student competition anymore. This was playing alongside professional musicians, in front of hundreds of people, performing one of the most beloved piano concertos ever written. "Are you okay?" her mother asked, noticing her silence. Li Min looked up, a small smile forming despite her nerves. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of scared." Her father caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Like standing at the edge of something big." "Exactly." Li Min traced the notes with her finger, feeling the challenge they represented. 2 months ago, she had been a girl who hid in practice rooms and flinched at the sound of laughter in the hallway. Now she was preparing to perform with a symphony orchestra. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be hours of practice, moments of doubt, and the ever-present fear of failure. But for the first time, Li Min understood that the greatest risk wasn't failing. It was never trying at all. That night, she sat at her piano until nearly midnight, slowly working through the Rachmaninoff piece note by note, measure by measure. Outside her window, the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across her hands as they moved across the keys. She was no longer invisible. She was becoming who she was always meant to be, one note at a time. The weeks flew by in a blur of black and white keys, Li Min's life had become a carefully balanced schedule of school, practice, homework, and more practice. The Rachmaninoff piece demanded everything she had, technically challenging passages that required hours of repetition, emotional depths she was only beginning to understand, and the new experience of playing with orchestra cues rather than as a solo performer. 3 times a week, her father drove her to the symphony hall for rehearsals. The first time she walked into the full orchestra rehearsal, her knees nearly buckled. 50 professional musicians stared at her as Maestro Rodriguez introduced her as their guest soloist. A few raised eyebrows, clearly skeptical of the teenage girl in jeans and sneakers who was supposed to play Rachmaninoff. "Don't mind them," whispered Anna, the first chair violinist who had kindly shown Li Min where to put her coat and bag. "They looked at me the same way when I joined at 22. They'll change their tune once they hear you play." Anna was right. After the first run-through, shaky and hesitant as it was, the atmosphere in the rehearsal room shifted. By the 3rd week, Li Min had earned nods of approval from even the most serious-faced musicians. The elderly cellist brought her homemade cookies. The timpanist asked for her opinion on a particularly emotional passage where their parts overlapped. "You're becoming one of us," Maestro Rodriguez told her after a particularly good rehearsal. Coming from him, it was the highest praise possible. At school, Li Min's new status settled into something manageable. The initial excitement faded, and she was grateful to no longer be the main topic of hallway conversations. Still, things had changed. People knew her name now. She was invited to sit with different groups at lunch. Teachers who had barely noticed her before now asked about her music and upcoming performance. Best of all was her growing friendship with May, who had appointed herself Li Min's unofficial manager, keeping track of her rehearsal schedule and making sure she remembered to eat lunch on practice days. "You need a dress," May announced one afternoon as they walked home from school. "Something amazing for the concert." Li Min looked down at her plain sweater and jeans. "I have a black dress. The one from the competition." May shook her head firmly. No. That was for a student competition. This is the state symphony. You need something." She waved her hands, searching for the right word. "Memorable." The problem, of course, was money. The scholarship was for college, not clothes, and Li Min's parents could barely afford the gas for the extra trips to the city for rehearsals. A new concert dress was out of the question. When Li Min explained this, May wasn't deterred. "Leave it to me," she said with a mysterious smile. 2 days later, May arrived at Li Min's apartment with a large garment bag. "My cousin works at a bridal shop," she explained, unzipping the bag to reveal a floor-length gown in deep crimson. "They had this sample that wasn't selling. It needs some alterations, but my aunt can help with that." Li Min touched the silky fabric with trembling fingers. The dress was the color of good luck, of Chinese New Year, of the red envelopes filled with money that her grandmother used to give her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But I can't." "You can and you will," May insisted. "Consider it a loan. When you're a famous pianist, you can buy me a dress for my concert." As the performance date drew closer, Li Min's nerves intensified. She practiced until her parents gently insisted she stop. Worried about the dark circles forming under her eyes, she recorded herself playing and listened to it obsessively, finding flaws no one else could hear. She dreamed of the concert, sometimes triumphant dreams where the audience rose in a standing ovation, but more often nightmares where she froze on stage or hit wrong notes that screeched like dying birds. "It's normal," her father assured her over breakfast, after she confessed to another bad dream. "Your grandmother had the same nerves before big performances." "Really?" Li Min had only known her grandmother as confident and assured at the piano. He nodded. "She told me once that nerves are just proof that you care deeply about something. The trick is to make friends with them instead of fighting them." 2 days before the concert, disaster struck. Li Min woke with a scratchy throat and a heaviness in her chest that she recognized immediately as the beginning of a cold. By afternoon, she had a fever. By evening, she could barely get out of bed. "I'll be fine," she insisted as her mother pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. "The concert isn't for 2 more days." But the next morning, she was worse. Her mother called Maestro Rodriguez while Li Min huddled miserably under the covers, listening to the one-sided conversation. "Yes, she's quite ill. No, I don't think she'll be well enough to rehearse today. The doctor said it's just a virus, but she needs rest." When she hung up, Li Min looked at her anxiously. "What did he say?" "Are they going to replace me?" Her mother sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed Li Min's hair back from her hot forehead. He said to focus on getting better. The final rehearsal is canceled, but they'll still expect you at the concert if you're well enough. Li Min closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lids. All these weeks of work and now a stupid virus might ruin everything. What if I'm not better by Saturday? Then they'll use their backup pianist. But that's not going to happen, her mother said with firm confidence. We'll make sure of it. What followed was a full-court press of traditional Chinese remedies mixed with Western medicine. Her mother brewed bitter herbal teas that Li Min forced down despite their awful taste. Her father went out in the rain to find the right kind of cough drops. Mi brought homework and stayed to quiz Li Min on history dates, insisting that keeping her mind active would help her body heal faster. By Saturday morning, the fever was gone, but Li Min still felt weak and shaky. Her throat hurt when she swallowed, and deep breaths triggered coughing fits. Still, there was no question of missing the performance. She would play if she had to crawl to the piano. You look beautiful, her mother said that evening, helping her zip up the red dress. They had taken in the waist and shortened the hem, and May's aunt had added delicate beadwork around the neckline. With her grandmother's hairpin securing her dark hair in an elegant twist, Li Min hardly recognized the young woman in the mirror. The concert hall was packed. Peering through the curtain, Li Min saw row after row of people dressed in their finest clothes, programs open on their laps. She spotted her parents in the fifth row center, seats that Maestro Rodriguez had reserved especially for them. May and her family sat a few rows behind. Even Mrs. Rivera had made the trip from Riverside, bringing several other music students with her. Nervous? Asked Anna, adjusting her violin strings nearby. Terrified, Li Min admitted. The violinist smiled. Good. Channel it into the music. Rachmaninoff wasn't written to be played by someone feeling calm. The first half of the concert passed in a blur as Li Min waited backstage. The orchestra played Dvořák beautifully, but she barely heard it through the pounding of her own heart. During intermission, Maestro Rodriguez found her sitting alone in a practice room, running through the piece one last time in her head, her fingers moving silently above her lap. Are you ready? He asked. Li Min started to nod, then changed her mind and shook her head. No, but I'll play anyway, he laughed. That's the spirit. Remember, the orchestra is with you. We rise and fall together. When the curtain rose for the second half, Li Min walked onto the stage with measured steps, focusing on not tripping in her unfamiliar formal shoes. The audience applauded as she approached the piano. She caught a glimpse of her parents, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her father sitting tall and proud. Li Min took her seat at the piano, adjusting the bench carefully. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, breathing deeply despite the tickle in her throat. Then she looked up at Maestro Rodriguez, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. The orchestra began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Li Min counted measures in her head, waiting for her entrance. When it came, she lifted her hands to the keys and began to play. The first few minutes were difficult. Her fingers felt stiff, her breathing shallow from lingering congestion. But then something remarkable happened. As the music flowed through her, Li Min felt her body responding, her lungs opening, her energy returning. The notes on the page that she had struggled with for weeks suddenly made perfect sense, as if Rachmaninoff himself were whispering their secrets in her ear. She and the orchestra moved as one organism, responding to each other's cues with a sensitivity that felt almost magical. When the movement reached its emotional peak, Li Min forgot about technique, forgot about the audience, forgot about everything except the pure feeling flowing from her heart through her fingers to the keys. The final notes hung in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Then silence, a perfect, complete silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. The applause, when it came, was thunderous. The audience rose to their feet in a wave, clapping and cheering. Li Min stood shakily, turning to acknowledge the orchestra before facing the audience again. Flowers appeared, a huge bouquet handed to her by a stagehand. Maestro Rodriguez shook her hand, then surprised her by pulling her into a quick, gruff hug. Bravissima, he whispered before releasing her. Li Min bowed deeply, the way her grandmother had taught her. As she straightened, she looked directly at her parents. Her mother was crying openly now, her face radiant with joy. Her father pressed his hand to his heart, a gesture that needed no translation. In that moment, Li Min understood what her grandmother had meant all those years ago. Music wasn't just about playing notes correctly or impressing an audience. It was about building bridges between performer and listener, between cultures, between past and present. The girl who had once tried to disappear now stood in the spotlight, finally fully visible, not despite who she was, but because of it. 4 years later, Li Min stood in front of her dorm room mirror, adjusting the simple pearl necklace her parents had given her as a graduation present. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the prestigious Eastman School of Music campus in golden light. Hard to believe that her undergraduate years were already coming to an end. On her desk sat an official-looking envelope she had received that morning, the third such offer this month. This one came from the San Francisco Conservatory, inviting her to their graduate program with a full scholarship, plus a stipend for living expenses. The other offers were equally impressive: Juilliard in New York and the New England Conservatory in Boston. Li Min still couldn't quite believe it. Sometimes she would wake up in her dorm room, momentarily disoriented, half expecting to find herself back in that small apartment in Riverside, dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly out of reach. A knock on her door interrupted these thoughts. "Come in," she called, already knowing who it would be. May burst into the room dressed in her own graduation robe. Though they had gone to different colleges, May to study business at the State University, they had remained close friends, talking almost daily and visiting whenever possible. "Ready for your big day, superstar?" May asked, flopping down on Li Min's neatly made bed. Li Min smiled at the nickname that had stuck all these years. "Almost. Just waiting for my parents to arrive." "They must be so proud," May said, picking up the San Francisco offer letter and whistling. "Another one? That's 3 top schools fighting over you now." "I still haven't decided which to accept," Li Min admitted, sitting beside her friend. "What's to decide? Juilliard is obviously the most prestigious." Li Min shrugged. "Yes, but San Francisco is closer to home. And the professor I want to study with teaches there." "Wherever you go, you're going to be amazing," May said with the unwavering confidence that had helped carry Li Min through many moments of doubt. "Have you told your parents about the offers?" "Not yet. I wanted to wait until after graduation." Li Min glanced at her watch. "They should be here any minute. My dad texted that they were parking." The mention of her parents brought a warm feeling to Li Min's chest. These 4 years had been hard for all of them. The distance, the financial strain, even with her scholarships. The way she'd missed so many family dinners and holidays because of performances and rehearsals. Yet they had supported her without question, never making her feel guilty for pursuing her dreams. A second knock came at the door, and Li Min jumped up to answer it. Her parents stood in the hallway, her mother holding a bouquet of lilies, her father carrying a small wrapped package. "Mom! Dad!" Li Min pulled them both into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her mother's perfume mixed with her father's aftershave. Her mother held her at arm's length, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Look at you, so grown up." Her father nodded, his smile revealing new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 4 years ago. "My little pianist graduating from music school." "I'm hardly little anymore," Li Min laughed, though she felt a tug of emotion at how much older they looked. Her father's hair had turned completely gray, and her mother seemed smaller somehow, more delicate. "You remember May," she said, gesturing to her friend, who had risen from the bed. "Of course." Her mother embraced May warmly. "Thank you for taking care of our daughter here." "More like she took care of me," May said with a grin. "Without her help, I never would have passed statistics." Li Min's father handed her the small package. "A graduation gift. From your grandmother." Li Min froze. "From grandmother? How?" "She left several things with me before we left China," he explained, "with instructions for when to give them to you. This one was for your graduation from music school." With trembling fingers, Li Min unwrapped the package. Inside was a vintage recording, a vinyl record in a faded sleeve. The label showed it was a recording of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, performed by the Beijing Symphony Orchestra in 1975. And there, listed as the soloist, was her grandmother's name. "I didn't know she recorded this," Li Min whispered, tracing the characters of her grandmother's name. "It was her greatest achievement," her father said quietly. "She was one of the first female soloists to perform with the Beijing Symphony after the Cultural Revolution." when Western classical music was allowed again. Li Min carefully placed the record on her desk, making a mental note to find somewhere to play it later. "Thank you," she said, hugging her parents again. "This means everything to me." "We have something else to tell you," her mother said, exchanging a meaningful look with her father. "We've been saving a little money each month since you started college." Li Min felt a flicker of concern. Her parents had always struggled financially, especially with the added expenses of her education. "Mom, Dad, you didn't have to." "We wanted to," her father interrupted gently. "We've saved enough for 2 plane tickets to China. We thought after graduation, you might want to visit your grandmother's hometown. See where she taught, where she performed." Li Min felt tears spring to her eyes. In all these years, they had never been able to afford a trip back to China. The thought of walking the streets her grandmother had walked, seeing the places that had shaped her musical journey, was overwhelming. "All of us?" she asked, voice thick with emotion. "The 3 of us together?" Her mother nodded, smiling through her own tears. "All of us, together." May discreetly slipped out, giving the family their private moment. Li Min sat with her parents on the small dorm room bed, planning their trip, sharing memories, talking about the future. The graduate school offers weren't mentioned. That conversation could wait. Today was about celebrating how far they had all come together. 2 hours later, Li Min walked across the stage of Kodak Hall in her cap and gown, accepting her diploma to enthusiastic applause. From her seat in the audience, she could see her parents standing and clapping, her mother waving excitedly, her father's face shining with pride. After the ceremony, as graduates and families mingled on the sunny lawn, Li Min's former piano professor, Dr. Wilson, found her among the crowd. "There's someone here who wanted to meet you," he said, gesturing to an elegant older woman in a tailored suit. "Li Min, this is Ms. Abernathy from the Young Artist Foundation." The woman shook Li Min's hand firmly. "Congratulations on your graduation. Dr. Wilson has told me a great deal about your talent." "Thank you," Li Min replied, trying not to show her surprise. The Young Artist Foundation was one of the most prestigious organizations supporting emerging classical musicians. "We've been following your career since your performance with the State Symphony 4 years ago," Ms. Abernathy continued. "Very impressive for someone so young. We'd like to offer you a place in our international touring program this fall." Li Min blinked, trying to process this unexpected offer. "International touring?" "6 countries in Asia, including China," Ms. Abernathy said, handing her a business card. "Call me next week if you're interested. We can discuss details." After she walked away, Li Min turned to Dr. Wilson, still stunned. "Did that really just happen?" He laughed. "You've earned it. Your playing has always been technically excellent, but in the past year, you've found something more, a voice that's uniquely yours." His words reminded her of what Maestro Rodriguez had said all those years ago. Li Min looked across the lawn to where her parents stood talking with May and her family. Her mother caught her eye and smiled, a smile so full of love it made Li Min's heart ache. That evening, after a celebration dinner with her parents, May and several friends, Li Min returned to her dorm room alone. Tomorrow she would pack up 4 years of memories and move out. Tomorrow she would need to start making decisions about graduate school and the touring offer. But tonight she sat at the small digital piano she kept in her room and placed her hands on the keys. Without sheet music, without thinking, she began to play the piece that had changed everything, Chopin's Revolutionary Etude. The notes were the same as they had been that day in the competition, but Li Min was different. Her fingers carried the memory of thousands of hours of practice, dozens of performances, moments of failure and triumph. She played not just with technical precision, but with the emotional depth that comes only from living fully, from embracing both pain and joy. As the final chords reverberated in the small room, Li Min thought about the girl she had been, afraid to be seen, afraid to be heard, and the woman she had become. The journey wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about becoming more fully herself. She thought of all the people who had made this possible, her parents who had sacrificed everything, her grandmother whose legacy lived on in every note she played, Mrs. Rivera who had first seen her potential, May who had believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself, Maestro Rodriguez who had pushed her beyond what she thought possible. Music had given her a voice when words failed. It had built bridges across cultures, across generations, across the divide between who she was and who she could become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new music to master. The path ahead wasn't clear. Graduate school or international tour, San Francisco or New York or Boston, performer or teacher or composer. But Lee Min was no longer afraid of uncertainty. She had learned that life, like music, wasn't about knowing every note before you began. It was about finding your own rhythm, your own melody, and playing it with all your heart. She closed the piano lid gently and went to the window. Outside, stars dotted the night sky above the campus where she had grown into herself. Somewhere in that vast darkness was China, her grandmother's piano, the roots of who she was, and somewhere in the darkness was also her future, waiting to be discovered note by note, measure by measure, song by song. Lee Min smiled and drew the curtains closed. Tomorrow's music would come soon enough. Tonight she would rest in the beautiful cadence of how far she had already come, from a girl mocked for her differences to a woman celebrated for her unique voice.